Ma'am, step aside. I need to conduct a secondary search of your luggage.
I already passed the scanner. Why am I being checked again?
It's a random selection.
That's private. Do you really need to inspect that?
Yeah, well, people like you tend to hide things.
Wow, people like me?
If you don't want trouble, you let me check everything.
Airport security officer Gerald Mackey had worked at Philadelphia International Airport for 9 years, but only 5 of those years conducting passenger screening at Terminal A international gates. He developed what supervisors described as thoroughness in secondary inspections, though passenger complaints told a different story. One Friday afternoon at Gate A7, his decision to subject a black woman to an invasive, unprofessional search would cost the Transportation Security Administration $5.2 million and end his career in airport security permanently. A black woman in her early 30s, Dr. Naomi Chambers, was traveling through the international terminal after attending an academic conference in London. She'd already cleared the standard security scanner with her carry-on luggage, heading toward her gate for a connecting flight home. She wore professional travel attire, a blazer over a blouse, slacks, her university faculty ID visible on a lanyard around her neck. No alarms, no flags, no legitimate calls for additional screening. Just a professor trying to catch her flight after a week of presenting research abroad. But Officer Mackey saw her and made a split-second judgment rooted in bias. He believed a young black woman traveling internationally needed extra scrutiny, regardless of what the scanner showed. That assumption triggered a humiliating public search that would be captured on multiple CCTV cameras, documented by witnesses, and become the centerpiece of a federal lawsuit exposing how racial profiling operates even in supposedly neutral security procedures. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button. Stories like these need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more truth to light. Philadelphia International Airport, Terminal A, the international arrivals and departures hub where thousands of passengers move through security checkpoints daily, where CCTV cameras monitor every angle, where procedures are supposed to be standardized and professional. The clock read 3:20 on a Friday afternoon. The terminal hummed with activity, families reuniting, business travelers rushing to connections, the organized chaos of international travel. Dr. Naomi Chambers had been an associate professor of sociology at Temple University for 6 years. Her research focused on systemic inequality in institutional settings, published in top academic journals, presented at conferences worldwide. She'd earned her PhD from Princeton, she'd received teaching awards, she'd been featured in Philadelphia Magazine's 40 Under 40 list, recognizing young professionals making an impact. Her colleagues respected her scholarship, her students praised her dedication. Her department chair considered her one of their rising stars. That Friday, she wasn't thinking about accolades or recognition. She was thinking about getting home, unpacking, and preparing her notes for Monday's lecture. She'd spent the week at a sociology conference in London, presenting her latest research on racial bias in public institutions. The irony of what was about to happen wouldn't be lost on anyone. Naomi had landed 2 hours earlier, collected her checked bag, and was now moving through the security checkpoint to reach her connecting gate for the short flight to her final destination. She'd placed her carry-on bag on the conveyor belt, walked through the metal detector without incident, collected her bag on the other side, and started toward her gate. She was doing exactly what millions of travelers do, following procedures, complying with security protocols, creating no problems. But to Officer Gerald Mackey, her smooth passage through screening wasn't enough. Gerald Mackey had joined the TSA 9 years earlier after working private security at shopping malls and office buildings. His initial training evaluations noted his attention to detail, but also flagged his tendency to focus disproportionately on certain passengers. When he moved to international terminal screening 5 years ago, the pattern became clearer. In 5 years at Terminal A, Mackey had been named in 17 passenger complaints. 14 involved black or brown travelers subjected to secondary searches after already clearing standard screening. The complaints described similar experiences: being pulled aside without explanation, having luggage searched more invasively than procedure required, being questioned in ways that felt discriminatory rather than security-focused. A black businessman traveling to Nigeria stopped and questioned about the legitimacy of his trip despite having proper documentation. A Latina mother with her children, forced to unpack every item in her bags while white families passed by unexamined. A South Asian professor returning from India questioned repeatedly about what he was bringing back despite declaring nothing. An elderly black woman traveling to visit family, her personal items examined so thoroughly she missed her flight. Every complaint had been logged. Every complaint had been reviewed. and every complaint had been dismissed with familiar bureaucratic language. Officer followed TSA protocols. Secondary screening is discretionary. Recommend refresher training on passenger interaction standards. Mackey attended the trainings, he completed the modules, and then he returned to the checkpoint and continued targeting passengers of color for additional scrutiny that white travelers rarely experienced. That Friday afternoon, Mackey watched the security monitors from his station near the checkpoint exit. He saw Naomi collect her bag and start walking toward the gates. Young black woman, professional clothes, traveling internationally. In his mind, that combination required verification. He called out to her, "Ma'am, step aside. I need to conduct a secondary search of your luggage." Should airport security require supervisory approval before conducting secondary searches on passengers who've already cleared screening? Drop your answer below. Naomi stopped, confused. She turned back toward the checkpoint where Mackey was gesturing to a screening table off to the side. She walked over, pulling her carry-on behind her. "Is there a problem?" she asked. "I already passed through the scanner." Mackey's tone was bureaucratic, rehearsed. "It's a random selection. I need to inspect your bag." Naomi felt the first flutter of unease. She traveled internationally dozens of times. She knew what random selections looked like. They happened at the initial screening, not after you'd already cleared and started walking away. "I already passed the scanner," she said again. "Why am I being checked again?" "Random selection, ma'am. Please place your bag on the table." Naomi looked around. Other passengers were flowing through the checkpoint, collecting their bags, heading to their gates. None of them were being called back for additional screening, just her. She placed her carry-on on the table, her unease growing into something sharper, awareness. Recognition of a pattern she'd researched, written about, taught her students to identify. Mackey unzipped her bag and began removing items. He pulled out her laptop, her conference materials, her toiletry bag. He examined each item with exaggerated attention, holding things up to the light, turning them over. Then he reached the section where she'd packed her clothes. He pulled out a neatly folded blouse, then a pair of slacks. Then he reached deeper and pulled out underwear. Naomi's face went hot with embarrassment and anger. "Hey," she said sharply, "that's private. Do you really need to inspect that?" Mackey held the garment up, examining it in a way that had nothing to do with security and everything to do with humiliation. He turned it over slowly, running his fingers along the fabric. "Yeah, well," he said, his tone casual, dismissive. "People like you tend to hide things." The words landed like a slap. "People like you?" Naomi stared at him, disbelief giving way to cold fury. Wow, people like me? Mackey didn't even have the grace to look uncomfortable. He just continued searching through her bag, pulling out more clothing, more personal items, handling each piece with deliberate slowness. "If you don't want trouble," he said, not looking at her, "you'll let me check every single item." Around them, other passengers were starting to notice. A woman waiting in line pulled out her phone. A man collecting his bag slowed down, watching. The security checkpoint had CCTV cameras covering every angle, recording everything. Naomi's mind raced. She knew her rights. She also knew that arguing with TSA could result in missed flights, escalated situations, being labeled as uncooperative. She'd seen it happen to others. She'd studied it in her research. But she also knew she was being profiled, targeted, humiliated in public based on nothing but Mackey's bias. "Officer," she said, her voice controlled but laced with anger. "I'm Dr. Naomi Chambers. I'm a sociology professor at Temple University. I just returned from an academic conference in London. I cleared security screening. You are conducting an invasive search of my personal items without cause. And you just made a discriminatory comment about people like me. I want your name and badge number." Mackey's face flushed. He pulled out his TSA identification reluctantly. "Officer Gerald Mackey, and I want your supervisor right now." "Ma'am, if you're going to be difficult," "I'm not being difficult. I'm being violated. There's a difference." A TSA supervisor, a woman named Sandra Ortiz, approached after being flagged by another screener who'd noticed the situation developing. "What's going on here?" Mackey gestured dismissively at Naomi. "Passenger is refusing to cooperate with secondary screening." Naomi turned to Ortiz, her voice steady despite her anger. "That's a lie. I've cooperated with everything. What I'm refusing to accept is being singled out after already clearing screening, having my underwear examined in public, and being told that people like me tend to hide things. That's not security screening. That's racial profiling." Ortiz's expression shifted. She looked at the table, saw Naomi's clothing spread out, saw the personal items on display. She looked at the growing crowd of passengers watching. She looked at Mackey, whose face told her everything she needed to know. "Officer Mackey, step back," Ortiz said quietly. "Soup, I was just..." "Step back. Now." Ortiz turned to Naomi. "Dr. Chambers, I apologize. You're free to repack your bag and proceed to your gate. We'll be reviewing this incident." Naomi started repacking her belongings, her hands shaking slightly with residual anger and humiliation. Other passengers were openly recording now. The woman who'd first pulled out her phone was still filming. A man was typing rapidly on his phone, likely posting to social media in real time. "This isn't over," Naomi said quietly as she zipped her bag. "I'll be filing a formal complaint, and I want copies of all CCTV footage from this checkpoint." "You'll have access to everything," Ortiz promised, her face grim. "This shouldn't have happened." "But it did happen," Naomi said, "and I'm guessing I'm not the first person he's done this to." Ortiz didn't respond, which was answer enough. Naomi walked away from the checkpoint, her bag repacked, her dignity damaged, her professional composure barely maintained. She made her flight, but the humiliation stayed with her. The public examination of her underwear, the discriminatory comment, the assumption that she, specifically, needed extra scrutiny when dozens of white passengers had passed through without question. Do you think TSA officers should face automatic suspension for making discriminatory comments during searches? Let me know what you think. By that evening, videos of the incident had spread across social media. Passengers had captured multiple angles. The footage showed everything. Mackey pulling Naomi aside after she'd already cleared screening, the invasive search through her clothing, the prolonged examination of her underwear, the crowd of witnesses, Naomi's controlled confrontation, Black professor subjected to humiliating TSA search, university professor profiled at airport security, TSA officer makes discriminatory comment during invasive search. The university issued a statement of support for Dr. Chambers. Academic organizations condemned the incident. Civil rights groups demanded TSA accountability. The Philadelphia chapter of the NAACP called for Mackey's termination and a review of screening practices. The TSA launched an immediate internal investigation. When they pulled the CCTV footage, what they found was even more damning than the passenger videos. The security cameras had captured everything in clear detail. The footage showed Mackey watching Naomi on the monitors after she'd cleared screening. It showed him calling her back specifically, while other passengers continued to their gates. It showed the unnecessarily prolonged search, the deliberate handling of her underwear, the dismissive body language. And when they reviewed Mackey's history, the pattern became undeniable. 17 complaints, 14 involving passengers of color. Multiple instances of secondary searches conducted after passengers had already cleared initial screening. A clear, documented pattern of racial profiling. Civil rights attorneys contacted Naomi within days. This wasn't just about one humiliating search. This was about systemic discrimination in airport security, about the assumption that Black travelers required extra scrutiny, about the weaponization of security procedures to target people based on race rather than actual threat. The lawsuit named Officer Gerald Mackey, Supervisor Sandra Ortiz for inadequate oversight, and the Transportation Security Administration. The claims were extensive: racial profiling in violation of federal civil rights laws, Fourth Amendment violation through unreasonable search, intentional infliction of emotional distress, sexual harassment through inappropriate handling of intimate items, failure to train and supervise officers on non-discriminatory screening practices. The government's attorneys reviewed the evidence and reached a swift conclusion. This case was indefensible. CCTV footage from multiple angles, witness videos, Mackey's documented history of complaints, his own discriminatory comment captured on camera, a university professor with impeccable credentials subjected to public humiliation. The case settled within 11 months, $5.2 million, paid to Dr. Naomi Chambers, who donated a significant portion to organizations fighting racial profiling in transportation security and supporting women of color in academia. Officer Gerald Mackey was terminated 9 weeks after the incident. The termination letter was comprehensive and damning. Officer Mackey conducted an invasive secondary search of a passenger who had already cleared standard screening without legitimate security justification. He handled the passenger's intimate items in an unprofessional manner, made discriminatory comments, and engaged in a pattern of racial profiling documented across multiple complaints. His actions violated TSA policy, federal civil rights law, and basic standards of professional conduct. His employment is terminated immediately, and he is permanently barred from employment in any TSA or federal security position. Mackey's name was entered into a federal database of terminated security personnel. He would never work in airport security again. He attempted to appeal through his union, but they withdrew support once the full extent of the video evidence and his complaint history became public. Mackey issued a brief statement through an attorney. "I made serious errors in judgment that caused harm to Dr. Chambers. I allowed personal biases to influence my professional conduct. I take responsibility and apologize." The words meant nothing. The TSA faced intense scrutiny. Congressional representatives demanded hearings. The Department of Homeland Security launched a broader review of screening practices. How had Mackey, with 17 complaints over 5 years, remained in a passenger-facing role? Why had supervisors not identified and addressed the pattern? What training existed to prevent racial profiling in security screening? The internal review revealed systemic failures. Complaints logged but not aggregated to identify patterns. Training modules completed but not enforced. Supervisors overwhelmed with operational demands and unable to conduct meaningful oversight. Officers with clear bias indicators allowed to continue screening passengers. Reforms were announced. Mandatory bias training before any passenger screening assignment. Automated systems to flag officers with multiple complaints for immediate review. Prohibition on secondary searches after passengers have cleared initial screening without supervisor approval. Real-time monitoring of screening practices with particular attention to demographic patterns. Passenger rights advocates stationed at major checkpoints. Dr. Naomi Chambers became an unexpected voice in the national conversation about racial profiling in transportation security. She testified before Congress, she wrote op-eds for major newspapers, she incorporated the experience into her academic work, publishing a widely cited paper on the intersection of race, gender, and security theater. Her message resonated beyond airports. "I research systemic inequality for a living. I teach my students how to identify institutional racism. I've published peer-reviewed articles on bias in public institutions, and none of that protected me from being profiled and humiliated in an airport. If it can happen to me with my credentials and my knowledge and my resources, imagine what happens every single day to Black women who don't have those advantages." She paused during a particularly powerful congressional testimony, emotion breaking through her academic composure. Officer Mackey didn't see a professor returning from a conference. He didn't see a scholar. He didn't see a professional. He saw a young Black woman, and in his mind, that meant I needed to be searched, needed to be controlled, needed to have my underwear examined in public while other passengers watched. That's not security. That's ritual humiliation designed to remind Black travelers that we're always under suspicion. The hearing room fell silent. This wasn't just one officer's misconduct. This was a window into how racial profiling operates in spaces where it's disguised as neutral security procedure. Gerald Mackey didn't profile Naomi because of anything she did. He profiled her because of what she looked like: young, Black, female, traveling internationally. In his worldview, shaped by bias he'd never examined, that combination required extra scrutiny. It didn't matter that she'd cleared the scanner. It didn't matter that she had credentials. It didn't matter that dozens of white passengers passed through without question. In Mackey's mind, Black travelers were inherently more suspicious, more likely to be hiding something, more deserving of invasive searches. His bias was so embedded that he violated procedure, conducted an inappropriate search, made a discriminatory comment, and humiliated a professor in public, all captured on camera, all witnessed by dozens of people, all part of a pattern he'd repeated for 5 years while supervisors looked the other way. Airport security profiling operates on assumptions about who looks dangerous, who deserves suspicion, who needs to be controlled. And those assumptions are built on racism. They result in Black travelers being pulled aside more often, searched more invasively, questioned more aggressively. They turn what should be neutral safety procedures into mechanisms of discrimination. Gerald Mackey's career is over. That's justice. The government paid $5.2 million. That's accountability. But money and terminations don't undo the trauma. They don't erase the memory of having your underwear examined in public. They don't restore the dignity stripped away in front of strangers. The real question is, what changes now? Does TSA finally acknowledge that random isn't random when Black travelers are selected at disproportionate rates? Do they finally implement meaningful oversight to catch officers like Mackey before they violate hundreds of passengers? Do they finally train screeners to recognize that security doesn't require humiliation? Because if we don't fix the system that allowed Mackey to operate for 5 years with 17 complaints, If we don't address the bias that taught him to see threats in black faces, then we're just waiting for the next officer, the next checkpoint, the next professor who has to explain to Congress why she was searched while white passengers weren't. Comment if you believe this should be mandatory. Any TSA officer with 3 or more complaints alleging discrimination gets immediately moved to non-passenger facing duties pending investigation. And if you think stories like this matter, if you believe black travelers deserve the same dignity and respect as everyone else, then hit that subscribe button, because we're going to keep documenting these patterns. We're going to keep demanding accountability. We're going to keep fighting for equal treatment in every space, including airports where cameras capture everything, but justice only comes after lawsuits. This isn't just about one officer or one professor. It's about all of us, and whether we're willing to accept security procedures that profile by race or demand systems that actually protect without discrimination,